You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Coaching Inn. I'm your host, Claire Pedrick, and today it's my pleasure to be in the company of Carolyn Herfurth, who does all sorts of things, just a stalk on the internet. We're going to talk about imposter syndrome, but she does all sorts of other amazing things as well. So if you would like to get every episode as it comes out of the Coaching Inn, remember to subscribe or follow on your podcast platform. And let's get stuck in. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you for having me. There is nothing I like more than feeling like I'm in a pub than actually being in one.
Where actually are you?
I am in New York City right now.
Okay, cool. Great. So tell us a little bit about your journey into the world of conversations and coaching and all of those things.
Oh, wow. I'll give you the abbreviated version, starting with I left corporate America probably 22 years ago, almost to the date. I don't know when this is coming out, but 22 years ago. And I started my entrepreneurial world and working as a coach by helping people find and start franchises specifically. So I did that for about the first 8 years of my business. And then I got right into sales and business coaching from there, because what I noticed is when my clients bought a franchise, they still couldn't sell, even if they had a good business model. And marketing was difficult for them. So I thought, all right, I'm happy to help with that. So I created sales training programs, and that led to developing sales strategy and business strategy for entrepreneurs, thought leaders, coaches. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, one of my good friends, Dr. Valerie Young, who is the world's regarded as the global thought leader on the topic of imposter syndrome, and I decided we team up so that I could help her scale her thought leadership and get it out to more coaches and speakers and organizations. So instead of her hiring me as her coach, she asked me to be her business partner, which is something I didn't see coming.
Oh, wow. So what does that look like?
Well, so for the past few years, what we've done is we've taken her presentations, her workshops, her framework for resolving and addressing imposter syndrome, and we've created licensing programs for people to be able to deliver the exact same talk she gives, the exact same workshop she gives. And we offer that to coaches and speakers and facilitators, internal, like independents, and external, I should say, and internal to organizations themselves. And then we also teamed up with someone to create a coaching program so we could teach the framework, but also give coaches tools, specific tools, and strategies to, if you think you notice imposter syndrome or you kind of suspect your client might have imposter syndrome, how do you actually have that conversation without coming right out and saying, you know what, I think you have imposter syndrome, because it might not be true. And as you and I both know, diagnosing a client is probably not the best way to address it. So those are a couple of the programs we've developed so that we can scale a proven, vetted solution to imposter syndrome. So It's been really a journey.
So we could be having a conversation about scaling, but we're here to have a conversation about imposter syndrome. But I am kind of interested in the scaling conversation.
All right. Well, you take it wherever you want, Claire.
Well, where do we want to go? So what are the things that you notice? You've obviously, the two of you and Valerie, have done a huge amount of work. So what are the key things that you notice around imposter syndrome?
Well, it's what I find interesting, Claire, is that up to 82% of people experience it. Not all at once, but at one time or another. So what I find most fascinating, especially as it relates to coaches, is 4 out of 5 of your clients are or have or will experience imposter syndrome. Yet the strategies and the tactics and the tools that we use in other coaching situations just don't work in the same way when it comes to this topic, because it's so nuanced. And so the kind of the fallback things that work in so many other situations just don't work. And that is one of the things that I have found most fascinating about this whole, this whole thing.
82%. That doesn't surprise me, because well, my supervisor, Fiona Adamson, she said, would you like yourself if you didn't have it?
And what was your answer to that? Now I need to know.
No, I don't think I would, actually. I think there's something, I mean, there are ranges, aren't there, in anything, and for some people it can be absolutely crippling.
Mm-hmm.
For others, it can simply be there are versions, aren't there, which and how we show up on a particular day or in a particular moment will be very varied.
Well, and absolutely. In fact, one of the co-coiners of the term imposter phenomenon, which was really the original term for what is now known as imposter syndrome, she has a scale. And so you talk, an imposter syndrome scale. So when you talk about, for some people, it's more intense, and for others, it's less intense, but it still affects us. And it's not the same thing as low self-esteem. It's not the same thing as self-doubt. Self-esteem is like a global sense we have of ourselves. Self-doubt relates to confidence, where imposter syndrome, is very specific to achievement arenas. And it has a lot to do with our distorted definition of what competence looks like, what competence is. So, it gets all conflated with confidence, it's your superpower. No, it's not. It's not your superpower. That's rebranding what it is. So, it's really quite interesting to have just to hear what the different what's the word, the term, the way people describe it on social to kind of fit their narrative or make people feel good. That lasts for like 2 seconds. And then you get back to your space and you're like, but here's, I need to know everything in order to be competent, when that's not necessarily true. So it's a really, it can be really damaging for people's, ability to be as effective as they can be.
Yeah, and building on what you said, it can fuel the feeling that we have to just keep acquiring more knowledge because everyone else knows these things and I don't, so I must just keep pulling in more and more information.
Well, and actually, that's Dr. Young in her work discovered or observed 5 different ways people define competence. She calls them the 5 competence types. The internet named it the 5 types of imposter syndrome. So we let the internet name it. Go ahead. But perfectionism is one way people define competence, and that's just doing everything perfectly all the time. And, making one mistake equals failure for a perfectionist. An expert is the person who needs to know 110% before they raise their hand or speak up in a meeting or, put things forth. So, there's the perfectionist, there's the expert, there's the soloist. This is the person who thinks success means it requires unaided achievement. I can't get help from a coach or a team member because if I did, then I'm not competent. So There's the soloist. There's the natural genius, where this is the person who thinks and they're not necessarily a genius or even think they're a genius. Same goes with the expert. They're not necessarily an expert or even think they're an expert. But the natural genius is the person who thinks things need to come quickly and easily. So if I have a learning curve, then I'm not competent. So imagine the person who starts a new job, a new role. They're either doing something, start taking on a new project or having to learn a new technology. The natural genius is going to be like, how come I don't know this already? Like, I am a natural genius and I can go back to when I switched computers one time. And I went out, bought a new computer. This is 20 years ago. And I'm like, well, I should have this set up right away. Oh my gosh. It was the most painful experience ever. And I thought I should know it. And so that's the natural genius. That's just one example. And then the fifth competence type is the superhuman. So this is the perfectionist on steroids. This is the proverbial superwoman who needs to rock it at work, rock it at home, perfect wife, perfect parent, host all the family gatherings, cook gourmet meals, have a rock hard body, anything less is incompetent, right? So you use the example of what we would call an expert, but there are all these other ways. And it's not just, the reason we can call them types is because it's a collective distortion or definition of what competence really means. So there are a lot of perfectionists out there. And it's interesting because when we speak to a group of professionals, we will often ask, poll, which type do you identify with? And a lot of them, usually the perfectionists are the is the one that most people relate to. But coaches, when we ask the same question of groups of coaches, can you guess what competence type they identify with?
Oh, that's such a good question. I fear that you're going to say superhuman.
No, but that's it probably is a little bit higher it's the expert.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things we find with coaches, we need more training. We think we need more training or need to know everything when that's really not always the case. So yeah, it's interesting.
So as you're talking, it makes me think about masking, which is, I know I'm doing it, versus I think I'm doing something else. How intentional or how known is it and how unknown is it in that space?
I don't know the answer to that. Because it's maybe it's 50-50. I don't really know for sure. And that's why I think it's so important for coaches to be able to understand what the behaviors are, what the patterns are, what the coping mechanisms are, so that they can spot it and then, whip out one of their handy tools to say, to really get to the bottom of it and open up that conversation, because not everybody notices it. But like, we have a coach training program, and the coaches who are in that program, they will say to us, I have more and more clients saying, I think I have imposter syndrome. And the coaches are like, I don't really know how to deal with it. And then the other half of our coaches will say, my clients aren't naming it, but I suspect this is what's going on.
Yeah. It's interesting. You're talking to the coach who hates tools, just so you know. Because I can hear the listeners going, what's she going to say?
Well, why? Well, I'm not interviewing you. I'm curious why you don't like tools. We can have that conversation another time if you'd like.
Well, the headline is that I think people have got what they need in them, and it's about empowering them to think about stuff. But what was really interesting is when you were describing those different things, what I found was interesting as you were talking was the quality of noticing that the coach needs to have, or the person who's being coached needs to have, in order to be able to take a look at what's really going on.
It is
Fascinating.
important. It is important. I mean, I remember hearing Seth Godin speak one time, and he said, I observe things for a living. And I thought,
Yeah.
I love that. Like, that is such a great, oh, I just loved it. But that is a coach, a coach's role is to notice, right? And
Yeah.
observe and be able to, see what the patterns are and also know what to do, like know what questions to ask, right? So,
Yeah, and encourage people to do their own looking. It's interesting. I was doing a podcast earlier this week with Oscar Trimboli from Australia about listening, and we were
mhm.
talking about listening being entirely about looking, which is why I love the Seth Godin thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I'm now going to dive into things that are interesting to Claire today. But let's
Okay,
go back
let's
to
do
the.
it. Good. Here we go.
Let's just go back. So what are some of the offers that you make to people as they begin to work on their imposter syndrome?
Can you rephrase that? Can you ask that in
Yeah.
another way?
So when you're talking to somebody with imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
what can you offer to them to enable them to find a way through?
Right. So I'm going to tell you right now that I'm just going to give you like an overall framework, if that helps you, like with the deal with the aversion to tools. One of the first things we look at is, and this is probably quite common with any coaching situation, but the first thing we want to do is normalize it and give it context, right? So, not everybody understand, like one of the things about imposter syndrome is there's a sense of shame that goes with it, because it's like, oh, I'm the only one experiencing this. But when you say you're one of 82%, here's a name for it, here's context, again, you're not the only one. One of the concerns we have about what happens with imposter syndrome is that it gets over psychologized. And I know that coaches try to stay away from therapy or are supposed to stay away from therapy. So being able to put it in context instead of lying on your psychologist's couch. A lot of psychologists will specialize in imposter syndrome too, but then that makes it a completely individual experience. It's my problem. It's my family trauma. It's, all these things behind me. And it makes it like a story of one, when instead we're like, no, this is a story of 82% of people out there. So being able to normalize it in that way is great. And also understanding that it's not like, the saying, if it's not one thing, it's your mother, the family expectations and things like that. Helping helping a client to understand the source of your imposter syndrome, because it's not always family messaging or expectations. There's the confidence gap between males and females, well documented. In their 20s and 30s, females are far less confident than men. And that's a real problem, because those are your career platform building years. And so, people also know that in a group, if you have to choose a leader, they pick the most confident leader, not the most competent leader. And so when there's that confidence gap, women aren't leading as much as they can or should. When we get into our 40s and 50s, the confidence gap starts to even out. And by our 60s, women are more confident than men. By then we're like, screw it, I don't care anymore. But it is, that is a source. That is a way, it's a source. It's a way to look at things and what happens. And I don't know how many of your listeners are coaching younger professionals, or students, because students struggle with this quite a bit, is really, if they think they need to get more competent, they don't. They're already competent, full stop. So it's not a matter of needing to get more competent. It's about increasing confidence. So anyway, I was kind of going off on a tangent there, but there are other sources to look into. So, diversity, is it like societal issues? Uh, just if you're in a room or in a setting where you don't look or sound like other people, you don't have the same sense of belonging. If you're one of a few or the only or the first in your group to accomplish this, could be age, it could be gender, it could be race, it could be a lot of neurodiversity. There are a lot of different things that can contribute to that. So really understanding the societal sources that might be triggering imposter syndrome. It could be the industry, it could be the role, it could be like there's so many different things, but it always comes back to we have that distorted definition of competence and understanding what that is.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because when we can find ways of people being in the room with people who do look and sound like them, some of those things take on a different slant. So we have been for a number of years involved in the health service with a talent management support network for leaders, for nurses, and quite junior staff, in fact, from global majorities. Who you might have affixed those kind of experiences to, but when in the room with people who look and sound like them, suddenly start flying because they feel as though they're resourced rather than that feeling of being under-resourced and feeling alone.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a reframe, which is a part of which, no or not? You looked off to the side.
I'm just building on what we're talking about because what I've just described there is about aloneness. And that's another category. Sorry, I'm not trying to stir up the pot here, but it feels like that's another category, isn't it? Which is my aloneness makes me feel like an imposter, not the expert or the whatever.
Well, aloneness is really a source. So it's a source. It's not necessarily it's not necessarily a type of imposter syndrome. It could be a source for some people. So there are sources, which is we want people to understand what the source is. We don't want them to dwell on it, but understand like, oh, this is why I'm feeling this way right now. It's because I'm the only female in the room, or it's because I'm, the oldest person in the room or the youngest person in the room. It might be because my industry just fuels self-doubt, so there are different sources, or my family taught me that perfectionism is the only way. So understanding that source and giving your client context for why they're having the imposter moment is one thing. So the aloneness is more of I feel this way because I'm the only person in this situation who looks or sounds or whatever is like me. So we would consider that a source, not necessarily a competence type, which the competence types were the perfectionist, expert, soloist, etc. So is that?
Really, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because then you can bring in other things into the room as well, can't you? Like privilege. I feel my experience is that other people in this space are privileged. I feel like I don't have that privilege. I mean, it could be so many things, can't it?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And one of the things also that's common to everyone who experiences imposter syndrome is they're externalizing the reasons for their success. So, I just got lucky, or I was in the right place at the right time, or, I had the right connections, or, the reason they like my presentation is just because they like me, so we're externalizing why other people, what we can chalk our successes up to. And so that doesn't work long term, because when you do experience success, it's emotionally unclear how you got there. If you're always external, oh, it's not me, so that's That's something that's common to everyone who experiences imposter syndrome. So it's just important to understand that's just, it comes with the territory.
So what are your tips?
Well, so, beyond normalizing, we do recommend, as part of our framework, there are 3 parts to it. First, it's normalize. Second is to reframe. And we have all sorts of tools, which I'm sure you would love, just kidding, with a wink for you, Claire, to reframe it. And then the third part of the framework is to keep going regardless. And this isn't fake it till you make it. It's act as if. It's really a different mindset in terms of this. So there are all sorts of, when I talk about reframing, we have all sorts of tools that go under it, but it's really just saying, all right, let's say you look at one of your sources and you say, oh, I know I'm experiencing this imposter moment because the message I got growing up was this. I'm also the only, I'm the oldest person in the room. And that, it's also because I'm in an industry that fuels self-doubt, or there's organizational culture or something like that. A simple reframe is just to press pause and go, well, of course I feel like an imposter. I'm the only person in this situation. It's because my industry fuels this. It's the culture of the organization. It's how I grew up. I got this message. So it's really just pressing pause is one of the ways. A simple way to reframe is to do that. So by coaches helping their clients understand the sources, understanding and putting light on how do you define competence, and then saying, well, of course I'm having this imposter moment because I made a mistake in a presentation. And the way I define competence is perfectionist, is that everything needs to be perfect. No wonder I'm having an imposter moment. So it's really, if I were to give one broad brush, reframe, it's pressing pause, but you have to know what brought you here and, why you had the imposter moment. And when you're in that situation, if you don't have context, if you don't understand how you define competence, if you don't know what fuels those imposter moments, if you think you're the only one experiencing it, if you don't understand that you're constantly externalizing your successes, and that's what, if you don't understand those things, then you can't press pause and reframe because you don't know what's going on.
So there's something there that you're saying really clearly, Carolyn, about being compassionate to yourself, but knowing which bit you need to be compassionate to.
Well, yeah, or why? Which bit and why? Yeah. There's a woman, Dr. Young, met who had a disability, and she was starting her first job with this organization. In her words, she said to Valerie, I need to be super disabled person. And Valerie said, why? And she said, because they're taking a chance on hiring me. And the next time someone with a disability applies at this organization, I don't want them to not get the job because I screwed up. So I have to do everything perfectly. And so that was her belief of what she needed to do. So she was the first at that organization. And so that's that's something that really was her story she was bringing to it, when that wasn't necessarily the truth.
Yeah. And the pressure that puts on you is enormous, isn't it? Yeah. So reframe.
Yes.
Any other tips?
Really the keep going regardless, which is the third part of the framework. Right? I think people can oversimplify that, but this is a series of small moves. It's understanding that you have the right to be wrong. You have the right to have an off day. You have the right to screw up. You have the right, it's really just understanding that you're not going to get it right every day, every time, every moment. You're going to have days where you fall flat. You're going to have days where you are amazing. But on those days you're amazing, you don't have to externalize it and say, oh, I just got lucky, So that is the bit that I would say brings the framework home in terms of normalizing, reframing, and keep going regardless, and really understanding how each of those parts of addressing imposter syndrome with your clients can give you an overarching way to approach it and address it. And, some coaches want more tools. You don't, that's okay. But that's the overall, our approach to, and we know it works. Yeah.
So give yourself the credit is effectively what you just said, isn't it? So don't put it down to somebody else. Don't affix it to external circumstances. Say, I did good today.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Great.
With that said, though, I'm just going to say one of the most common pieces of advice that we see on the internet is, oh, you have imposter syndrome? Just write a list of your accomplishments to remind yourself of how great you are. Oh, I see the look on your face right now, Claire. And you're like, oh my gosh. I want to know what that face is for.
That doesn't cover I don't deserve to be here. Or I have does it? Or I don't have a right to be here, or any of the above.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It also doesn't have any lasting effect, because you might read that list and feel good for 2 minutes, and then you get back into your next meeting and all of a sudden that list is not there anymore. So, and it really disregards, like you talk about, the intensity that some people might experience with, their imposter feelings. So we just think it's terrible, terrible advice. We think, and it might work for someone who's newer into their career, like they might need those reminders. But another bit of bad advice, we believe, is that imposter syndrome is your superpower. And to us, that's just rebranding what can be a very painful, expensive, terrible experience for people. So, we don't think that women need to be told that, and, this is where I get into the gender. It's mostly men saying that imposter syndrome is your superpower. And that narrative really has come up in the past 4 or 5 years, since imposter syndrome has really gained steam as part of the, as part of the online conversation. So that is not helpful to tell a client either.
Yeah. So how do people find out more?
Our website is impostersyndrome.com. And we spell imposter. Well, I guess you can get at us either way. We spell imposter with an O-R. It's spelled both ways, impostersyndrome.com.
Okay.
We also have, for coaches, a free handbook that they can get if they type in impostersyndrome.com/handbook. And that's a great little resource. It just talks about some of the mistakes people make in those coaching situations and ways to not make those mistakes.
Okay.
Those are 2 great places to go to learn more specifically for coaches.
Brilliant. So I'll put all those in the show notes.
Okay.
Thank you, Carolyn, for coming and opening it up at the Coaching Inn. Really appreciate that.
Happy to be here. I'll come back next time. We'll talk scaling.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll be back next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching Inn, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.